Before we get started with the water cycle, we need to talk about the four spheres of the Earth. They're pretty important in terms of how water moves in between them. So we have the hydrosphere, lithosphere, atmosphere, and biosphere. So first, let's talk about the hydrosphere. The hydrosphere, remember that the prefix hydro means water. So this sphere contains all the water on the Earth. As the lesson mentioned, again, this is Unit 5 in Earth Science Semester 1. So the lesson, Unit 5, mentioned, hello, glad to have you. So as the lesson mentioned, more than 70% of the Earth is covered in water. So that's quite a big sphere. This water can be in the form of liquid and is found in lakes, oceans, ponds, rivers, and marshes. But the question is that all the water that we have on the Earth? What do you think? Is all the water that we have found in lakes, oceans, ponds, rivers, and marshes?
No.
No, where else could we find it?
Glaciers.
Glaciers, very good. We can find some in groundwater, okay? Underwater or underground reservoirs, good. Okay, so another sphere in the Earth, we have the lithosphere, and lithos means rock. So this is the rock or the ground sphere. So the lithosphere is made of the entire Earth's surface, and that includes the ocean floors. It extends to the Earth's crust and includes the brittle upper mantle. Now, why is it important to know about rocks and the lithosphere? I mean, we are studying water. So why is that relevant to the water cycle?
It stores water.
Exactly. We just talked about water being stored underneath the ground. And so perfect. We will talk about how those underground reservoirs are important in the water cycle. Awesome. Thank you. Next, we have the atmosphere. The atmosphere is a layer of gases that hover the Earth's surface. And the atmosphere is very important because it provides oxygen for us to breathe. It shelters us from the harmful UV radiation and protects us by the greenhouse effect, protects and warms us. So again, why is it important to know about the atmosphere when we're focusing on water? Oh, I left my answer up here. So let's just go over that. So we have water existing in the atmosphere as water vapor. And so water vapor is a crucial part in the water cycle, and it eventually will condense into clouds. And then the biosphere, again, bio meaning life, biology, biosphere, biodiversity all means life. The biosphere we've talked about before is made up of all the biotic and abiotic factors that make up our home. And again, why is this important? Why is a biosphere important when we're studying the water cycle? Any ideas?
I do, I have one.
Yes, please.
Because it holds water.
It does hold water, exactly. And if you think about it, water, is that an abiotic or biotic factor?
Abiotic.
Abiotic factor, exactly. So if we are talking about the biosphere and we're talking about all the abiotic and biotic factors, we're talking about all the life as well as the water and the climate and the temperature. So very good. Thank you. Okay, so what is the cycle to begin with? We need to know what that is before we elaborate on the water cycle. So the dictionary.com defines cycle as any complete round or series of occurrences that repeats or is repeated. So if we look back to the water cycle, water cycle completes a series of occurrences that are repeated. Okay, so water never stops moving within the water cycle. And here is just kind of a generic diagram of a cycle. So we have occurrence 1 leading to occurrence 2, leading to occurrence 3, leading to occurrence 4, leading to occurrence 5, and then starting the process over and over and over again. So repeating the whole process. Okay, so water cycle. Sometimes scientists refer to the water cycle as the hydrological cycle. Hydro, again, meaning water. So this cycle is a type of recycling, making water a non-renewable resource. What does non-renewable mean? What thoughts do we have about non-renewable?
We can't use it again.
Not necessarily not being able to renew or reuse it again, because remember in recycling we do reuse. What about renewable?
There's no more.
There's no more, exactly. So a non-renewable resource is something that can't renew itself. Okay, so like if we look at coal, coal is a non-renewable resource, okay? And so when we look at water, we can't create water. We can't renew water. And so the amount of water that exists on the earth has always been here and it's never changed. Very good, thank you. All right, so another cool thing about water is the phases or the states of water. So here on Earth, we can find water in 3 different states or phases of matter. We have a gas, we have a liquid, we have solid. So if we look at these 3 states of matter, what do we see? How can we describe these states of matter? What thoughts do we have? Let me maybe blow that up to make it a little bit easier for you. Oops, sorry. So what do we see? What do we see in gas? What do we see in liquid? What do we see in solid? Oh, sorry. Okay.
I feel like if we were looking, it kind of depicts a picture because gas, literally, we can't see it. So I can see, some cells separated. And then when you see the liquid, it's all together and it's all on the bottom. But when you see the solid, they're all kind of compressed together.
That's wonderful. That's perfect. Okay, very good. So if we are looking at a gas, the blue circles are representing molecules or particles. And when we have gas, gas is where we find the particles spaced out. There's lots of room in between the molecules in a gas for them to move, to spread out pretty easily and not be able to see it. In a liquid, we have them kind of closer together, but there's still room for them to move. And then a solid, the molecules are packed very tightly and they're rigid, so they don't move at all. Very good. Okay, so energy is going to be needed to begin any process or any cycle. And when we're talking about the water cycle, we need the sun to give us that initial heat energy to the surface of the earth. And so when we are dealing with a small scale, the molecules of the phases of water, the more energy we get, the faster the molecules move. And so there we have different phase changes. Okay, so again, once we add energy, we're adding speed to the molecules. And on the opposite side, when we remove energy, we're removing speed. So the molecules will slow down. Okay, so evaporation is where we're going to start our study of the water cycle. And so when we add energy to a liquid, so when the sun is heating up this body of water in the image, the molecules are going to speed up and spread apart. So the result is going to be a change of state equaling evaporation. So here we are adding energy to a liquid. The liquid is going to have the molecules start to speed up and spread apart, and there we have a gas. Okay, so in the picture, we have the liquid water in the body of water, as well as kind of the gas, the steam being released from the surface of the water due to the sun heating it up. And so when the sun heats up a body of water, the water begins to evaporate and rise to the atmosphere. Okay. Something that deals a lot with evaporation is transpiration. Transpiration is where we have moisture. So if we look, if we look down here in this picture, the moisture is going to be carried up through the roots, through the stem, and through the leaves and out through the leaf pores. Okay, it's going to remain a liquid when it's traveling through the plant, and once it gets released through the pores, it changes to a vapor and enters the atmosphere. Okay, it's essentially the evaporation of water from plant leaves. Okay, sublimation is also a phase change or a state change. So this is very interesting. Sublimation is the process of water turning from a solid into a vapor without first changing to a liquid. So a lot of times scientists will use dry ice to create this effect, okay? Because dry ice is a solid, and then when energy is added, it will quickly change into a vapor. So sublimation occurs mostly in the extremely cold and dry places. For example, high in the mountains is where you're going to see the snow changing directly into a vapor. Okay, so basically we have snow and ice changing right into a water vapor and rising into the atmosphere for sublimation. Again, this is another one of our states of matter, or changes of states of matter, excuse me. Okay, so now we have condensation. So condensation is where we are going to remove energy. We're going to take energy away from the source. And so when we do that, we have temperatures that are going to drop. And then in turn, our molecules in the water are going to slow down. So when we have condensation, we have water vapor molecules slowing down and changing back into liquid drops. So this is important because we have clouds that are formed from condensation. And then giving you a real world example, dew is condensation. Dew, when we find on the grass in the spring, summer months, that is condensation. So throughout the night, the temperatures have dropped, and that causes the vapor to return back to a liquid. Okay. Precipitation. Precipitation is where all the condensing, creating those clouds. Clouds will become heavier and heavier with the liquid droplets. And when they get too heavy, gravity takes over. And when gravity takes over, it releases those water droplets and allows them to fall to the Earth's surface. Now, depending on the temperature, we could have different forms of water. So we could have rain, which would be the liquid form, or we could have solid forming, which would be snow or hail or sleet. And so again, depending on the lack of energy or the temperature, we could find rain, sleet, snow, or hail. Okay? Any form that falls to the Earth through the Earth's atmosphere and lands into the Earth's surface would be precipitation. Any questions so far? Okay, well, make sure if you come up with any questions, make sure you interject so we can answer those and discuss them. Okay, so surface runoff also happens when we're dealing with the liquid form of water and gravity. In surface runoff, we have gravity pulling the water not from the atmosphere, but down from a higher spot. So downhill, down the mountain, okay? So eventually this water is going to make its way back to the ocean to begin the whole cycle over. Infiltration. It was interesting when I was trying to search for a image of infiltration. All I got were military pictures of infiltration. So I guess you could think of water infiltration as a similar concept. It's where we are going to find water seeping in the ground. So seeping in between rocks and soil and that extra space, and it's going to collect and pool in aquifers. Well, what exactly is an aquifer? It's kind of a different term that we don't always use. What is an aquifer? Any ideas? Right. Well, an aquifer is, since we're dealing with the ground and we're dealing with water seeping into the ground, an aquifer is going to be an underground reservoir that collects water. So it could be just that, an underground reservoir. It could be a well. It could be a lake or a pond that's been underwater for a while. So an aquifer is just kind of a storage unit of water underground. Okay, so here is a picture of the complete water cycle because we talked about all the steps of the water cycle. So here we can see the different steps and the different types of energy that we can see, whether it's being removed or added. So if we start with evaporation, we see the sun heating evaporation, adding that energy, and then we get the vapor rising from the body of water. Then we have, again, the sun adding energy to the plants and the trees, creating transpiration. Both of those joining the atmosphere and experiencing a temperature change, a temperature drop, and condensing, falling into clouds. Then once we get the clouds full of water droplets and enough vapor that's turned into droplets, then we will have the precipitation, whether it is rain that will fall directly on the Earth's surface and run off, or if we have precipitation in means of snow. And then the snow kind of serves again as a storage unit because snow will melt and then run off. Again, in drier climates, when they don't receive a lot of precipitation, that snow buildup and snow runoff serves as a lot of their moisture for the summer months. Okay, and so then we have the surface runoff into the body of water, and then the infiltration into the groundwater, which is stored and then used as needed. Okay, so using that same picture, I have found a video, so let's watch that for a few minutes.
Talk a little bit about the water cycle, which we're all familiar with. In fact, we're all part of the water cycle every moment of our lives. We might not fully appreciate it. But let's just jump into the cycle. I'll start with evaporation. So we could start with the surface of the ocean here, or this river, or this lake. And at any given moment, there's going to be water evaporating off of that surface. Water molecules that were in their liquid state, they just have enough energy to bounce away and go into the gaseous state. And water in a gaseous state we call vapor, water vapor. Water water vapor. And so that water vapor, it is going to rise likely with the air that has been heated on the surface due to the sun. And there's other more complex dynamics at play. But as it rises and as the overall temperature cools, that water vapor will condense into little droplets. It'll condense around little tiny air particles, little particles of dust that you can't even see with your eye. And that's what forms clouds. So this is little droplets, So the water is actually back to the liquid form. They're not individual water molecules anymore. They're now able to interact with each other, and they're condensing around these little microscopic dust particles and to form these water droplets. And if it's cold enough, they might also form small ice crystals. And that's what clouds are. And we see here, they're talking about transportation. You can have these clouds. We obviously, if you look outside, you see clouds. Those clouds are moving with the wind. And so they could be moving all of those droplets with the overall wind. And when those droplets get heavy enough, they will precipitate down. Now, they could precipitate back into where we started. They could go back to the ocean there. Or you could go onto a mountain here. And since if the air is cold enough and if you have the right conditions, that precipitation might be snow, and it might stay snow right over there, or ice. But then eventually things might warm up, or they might not warm up. But if they do warm up, well, then they would melt, and then they would be snow melt runoff, and that's what you're seeing there. If that rain is falling in this area, and let's say it's not cold enough for it to be snow, so then we are talking about rain. Well, most of that water is actually going to percolate down into the soil. So most of it goes down. We look around us and we see these rivers and lakes, and we say, oh, wow, there's a lot of water there. But it turns out there's actually a lot more water inside the ground, and obviously in the ocean. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. And so you have all of this water that forms in these underground aquifers here. But some of it also ends up in these lakes. And these lakes are usually in a situation where the ground is either already saturated with water, or there's the right types of rocks, so it can contain the water up here. And similarly, rivers are formed by runoff. It's, snow melt runoff can famously form rivers. And in general, if you see a creek or a river near your house, that especially when it rains, it fills up, that's a good indication that the groundwater is already saturated, and so things are running off into that river. And so that in general is the water cycle. You have evaporation, it condenses into clouds, and eventually precipitates, and it keeps going round and round and round. Now, of course, there's other actors at play. You have things like plants. Plants will take up water from the upper soil as far as the plant's roots go, and it will use that water to transport nutrients down from the soil up into the leaves. It also uses that water as part of the photosynthesis process that we've studied in many videos. And a lot of that water gets transpired out. So once again, this is transpiration, is essentially evaporation out of the leaves of the water. Over here, you see this word sublimation. That's going straight from the solid form of water, ice, into the gas form of water, or water vapor. And this will happen in situations where it's cold and it's very, 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 very dry. And you have, in general, low pressure. And so instead of going into the liquid state, right then the water molecules just start leaving as water vapor. Now, and of course, I said we're part of it. Well, how are we part of it? Well, we will drink some of this fresh water. Our bodies are actually mostly water. The cells in our bodies are 70% water. Everything we study in biology, water is a key environment for all of these things to occur. And then we use that water, and then we will get that water out of our body, and then it continues on as part of this water cycle. Now, one thing that I find really interesting as an organism that is dependent on fresh water, when people say fresh water, we're talking about water without salt as opposed to salt water. So we really need this water that's in the fresh water in this lakes or in this river, or we might dig wells so that we can get the water out of these aquifers. It actually turns out that very little of the overall water in the world is fresh water. And so let me show you this chart over here. I always knew that, but I didn't fully appreciate how little was fresh water. So of all the water on our planet, 97.5% is salt water for the most part in our oceans. Only 2.5% is fresh water. And even of that 2.5% fresh water, very little of it is what we traditionally associate fresh water, the lakes and the rivers. Where you'll say, oh, let me go to a lake or river, that's stuff that we could potentially drink. But most of it is actually in glaciers and permanent snow cover. So it's ice, snow that is just not melting. And it makes you think about what would happen if this stuff were to melt. And then you also have groundwater, which we could have access to. That's why people drink big wells. So we're talking about, well, groundwater includes soil moisture, swamp water, and permafrost. But very little of the water is actually in lakes and rivers, which I personally find fascinating. It wasn't obvious to me before I frankly saw this chart. Now, another really interesting thing is how long, on average, water molecules might stay in different parts of this water cycle. So, you know, going back here, you can imagine that a water molecule could stay for a very long time in the ocean, especially, you know, it's going to be moving around depending on ocean currents and temperature and all of that. But you can imagine it could stay in that liquid form in that ocean for a very long time. And maybe it spends a shorter amount of time in a cloud. And people have actually studied this, which I find fascinating. I'd be curious to figure out how they actually got this data. But this is the average residence time for water molecules. And you can see here that water can stay in glaciers and permafrost for a very long time. We're talking it could be up to 10,000 years, and these are all rough numbers. It could stay as groundwater anywhere from 2 weeks to 10,000 years, I guess, depending on how isolated that groundwater is. It could be in the oceans and seas in salt water for 4,000 years. And we can look at all of these all the way to within living organisms. It'll stay about, on average, a water molecule will last about a week in the atmosphere. So that's getting water vapor, turning to a cloud, precipitating down, on average 1.5 weeks. Once again, these are averages. It doesn't mean that every water molecule will take exactly 1.5 weeks in the atmosphere, but it's a pretty interesting thing to think about. And it gives you a little bit more sense of, well, one, where all the water is and how it all works together with the water cycle.
All right, so that again was a video brought to you by the Khan Academy, which really did a good job of explaining the water cycle. And I think it's fascinating to look at the different times, the different amounts that water does actually stay in a glacier, for example. So 10,000 years is pretty significant. Okay, and so, oops, I'm sorry. Let's get out of here. And so then just another image of the water cycle, because again, you can look at it in many different ways, in different terms. So again, evaporation from the ocean, moving into condensation and cloud formation, and then water staying up in the atmosphere within clouds, and then precipitation, and then runoff and infiltration. Okay. Any questions over the water cycle? So I know that our agenda was to cover the follow the drop activity, but I thought that the activity 5.2.1 was also a good one to throw into the mix, because it's labeling some of the steps that we see in this picture right now. So let me blow this up so we can see it a little bit better. Okay, so we have part of the water cycle on your screen right now, and we have precipitation, runoff, and condensation to choose from. So if we look at the image, number 5 represents what step? Which of precipitation, runoff, or condensation does number 5 represent? And I'm going to ask why. So number 5 is right up here. So what step would that represent?
Condensation,
Why?
because that's when the clouds form.
Very good. Excellent. Clouds are formed in condensate or because of condensation. Awesome. Okay, so number 6. Number 6 represents what states or what step, excuse me. So now we have left precipitation and runoff. Which of those is represented by number 6?
Precipitation,
Okay, well, why?
because gravity pulls them down.
Very good. Excellent. Exactly. So number 6 is showing us that gravity has pulled down those water droplets from the clouds. Awesome. And then number 7, we have one term left, is number 7 is represented by runoff. So we can see the precipitation falling on the surface and then running off into the various bodies of water. Awesome. Thank you. And then the other half of the image. So here we have solar energy and evaporation to choose from. And so if we're looking at number 1, what is number 1 representing? Solar energy or evaporation?
Solar energy,
Okay, why?
because it's sorry, solar is it's energy from the sun as opposed to coming up from the earth.
Okay, very good. Exactly. Solar means sun. And so number 1 is right on the sun, so giving us the idea that it's solar energy. And then number 2 represents evaporation. So again, we have the sun's energy warming those molecules in the body of water and causing them to speed up and then enter the atmosphere. Awesome. Thank you for your help. Okay, so continuing on, so why do we need to study the water cycle? Okay, so water cycle is important again because we need the sun to add that energy to begin the cycle, as well as a water cycle impacting our daily lives in weather and climate. Okay, so again, in Unit 5, it talked about different ways the water cycle can impact the different spheres of the Earth. Okay, so the water cycle in the atmosphere, again, water enters the atmosphere through evaporation, transpiration, and sublimation. So let's just review those 3 things again. So what is evaporation? How could we explain or define evaporation? Again, we're just reviewing, excuse me, evaporation.
Evaporation is the gas.
Okay, so evaporation is water turning to a vapor from what state?
Liquid.
Very good. So we have evaporation, a gas from a liquid, and then transpiration. How would we explain transpiration?
That's my favorite. It's from plants.
Okay, tell us more about that. What happens in plants?
Well, it needs so when the sun hits a plant, the plant not only provides oxygen for us, but it also has a system where the energy of the sun, how can I explain this? It transpires, water transpires from out of the plant and it goes back into the cycle. So it goes back into the atmosphere. We cannot see it, but it does happen.
Awesome. That was a great explanation. Great. Thank you. And so finally, sublimation. How could we explain sublimation? This is the process that happens in drier, very cold climates. Sublimation skips the liquid stage of water. So it is where snow or ice will directly change into water vapor. Okay, good. So all of these forms are water vapor. And so that's where we're going to find, that's what we're going to find in the atmosphere. So water vapor is going to hang out in our atmosphere for the water cycle. And so impacts on the atmosphere. So water vapor, again, in the atmosphere is a sign of humidity. And like everyone living in Ohio, we are probably pretty familiar with humidity. What exactly is humidity? What do you think?
Water in the, how can I explain this? It's water in the, it's water in the atmosphere, not in the, yeah, in the atmosphere that you can feel. So, it's not, I would say that's kind of like there's a lot of fog because
Okay.
water that's in the air. So,
Okay. So it's not necessarily the liquid form of water, but the water vapor. It's kind of like how much moisture is in the atmosphere. That's excellent. So the more water vapor or the more moisture we have in the atmosphere, the more humid it's going to be. And that's the my least favorite thing about Ohio weather is the darn humidity. Okay, so another impact that we have in the atmosphere is where we're going to find clouds. Clouds are going to form in the atmosphere. And what causes clouds to form? That condensation state of the water cycle. All right, so regions that don't receive much rain are going to rely on the snow melt to water their crops and to replenish their reservoirs. Because they don't get a lot of the rain, they have to rely on the feet of snow that they receive during the wintertime. And then all of these things are going to affect the amount of water that we have for animals and ourselves and plants. Okay, so water cycle and the hydrosphere and the lithosphere. So we have water that enters these spheres by two things. They can fall into the bodies of water and join the the hydrosphere, or they can fall into the ground and seep there, which is going to enter the lithosphere. So again, when wet rain falls on the ground, it can move in one of two ways. It can run off the surface of the ground and enter surface water, for example, the oceans, the streams, the rivers, the lakes. Or it can seep into the ground and enter groundwater. And what step of the cycle is that called? Where we seep into the ground and enter groundwater. What step of the water cycle is that where we get seeping into the ground and entering groundwater?
is that runoff?
Not quite runoff, but close.
Infiltration.
Infiltration, exactly. So you can kind of think of a military image where the soldiers are kind of breaking through. So seeping into the ground, breaking through, entering the groundwater is definitely infiltration. Awesome. Thank you. Okay, so the impacts on lithosphere, again, lithosphere meaning rock, and so that's going to be the Earth's surface. The lithosphere is going to contain the aquifers, the underground reservoirs that holds fresh water, and that's going to feed streams, lakes, and rivers. Also, the water cycle has created a lot of the landforms that we see on the Earth's surface. And so how are precipitation and runoff involved in creating these gorgeous landforms that people seek out to see on the Earth's surface? So how are precipitation and runoff involved in, say, the Grand Canyon, for example? What are some thoughts?
The lack of water, or it creates a mineral, I would say.
Okay, and what happens to that? What does that mineral do?
Well, that's how it forms, you know, whether it's so there are rocks. I'm not all the way sure on the Grand Canyon, but that's how it forms the mineral.
Okay,
From
okay. So it can create some
beautiful rock formations.
perfect. Okay, good. Thank you. Precipitation and runoff. Water is a pretty strong element, and so after years and years and years of falling on something, or having water or a lake or a river run through something, it's going to kind of get smaller and smaller, like a river rock. If a river rock is in a stream and it's being tossed and turned through that water current, it's going to have super soft edges, super round, because it's been worn down. And so a lot of the landforms that we see, like the Grand Canyon, it's kind of been eaten away, kind of dwindled down into the gorgeous canyon that we see. I know Unit 5 mentioned some arches in the west, and those are due to precipitation, just kind of smoothing off the edges and wearing the land thin. So then we have erosion, where we can remove topsoil, and sedimentation that will pick up the soil and rock and move it somewhere else. So both of those, erosion makes more food available for living organisms. Okay, so are there any questions over the water cycle or the different spheres of the Earth? Take a couple minutes or take a little bit of time just to kind of see if there's anything that we need to go over.
Are you allowed to discuss what the numbers were next to the pictures? Because I know it's on the it said that we should answer what the numbers were, and I couldn't figure out what the numbers were next to the pictures.
Oh, are you talking about the carbon, how carbon is released? And
Oh, yeah. Okay, I'm on the wrong one. I'll email you. Sorry.
that's okay. That's okay. Yeah, we can talk about that one for sure. Okay, so then any other questions on the water cycle?
Where would you recommend starting? One of my biggest things was, where do I start the paper itself? Is there a recommendation where you would start, whether it's, you know, because it's a follow the drop, where would you recommend to start that?
Well, that's up to you. And I know that that's kind of difficult for some of us to be creative and kind of start wherever we want. But so on your screen, I've posted the directions. So I just kind of wanted to go over there. So in this activity, you will identify the different steps in the water cycle by playing the role of a drop of water. You are going to tell the story of what it's like to be a drop of water moving through the water cycle. Break down the water cycle step by step and describe the sequence of events that take place. Also summarize the benefits and results that occur over and over again as a result of the water cycle. It's your choice whether you are a water droplet from ancient past, when dinosaurs roamed the earth, or a water droplet in present day. So here's your kind of creativity, your starting point. Because you are a drop of water and it's your story, you may choose where you begin your journey in the water cycle. For example, you can begin as a drop in the ocean, a lake, or in an aquifer. However, be sure to give the steps in their proper sequence from that point where you begin your journey. If you begin as a molecule of water in a plant, your journey will start through transpiration. If you decide to begin as a drop of water flowing downhill in runoff, you'll track your journey to the ocean and through the water cycle. Just remember that since the water cycle is continuous, wherever you start is where you will eventually end up again. Be creative, but be sure to include all the steps in the water cycle. Refer to the rubric in the drop box at the top right of the screen to see how this activity will be created. So part of the assignment could be you creating a story, and you are taking the role as a drop of water. And you can, since Juana, you said that your favorite was transpiration, you could start there. And you could be a water droplet that was just absorbed through the roots of a big sycamore tree. And then from there, flow through the water cycle and then end up being absorbed through the roots of a daisy or something like that. Also, try not to be, sometimes when students have seen this, these instructions, they get caught up with being creative. Well, some of us really aren't creative, and that's perfectly okay. Because the importance of this activity is to be able to explain the steps of the water cycle. I think it's more interesting as a teacher to read a story about a droplet of water. However, again, we're not all creative. We're not all able to think in terms of being a drop of water. So that's perfectly fine. Again, the importance is to be sure to give the steps in their proper order. From where you begin, and then make sure that you end wherever you start is where you eventually end up. Okay. Also, it says to break down the water cycle step by step and describe the sequence of events and summarize the benefits and results. So it tells me that this very last sentence, it refer to the rubric. So as a student, that tells me, okay, I have a rubric that I can look at and think, and a rubric's going to tell me how it's going to be graded. So if I look at the rubric that's associated with this assignment, the first section of this rubric is going to be my content, and I can earn up to 4 points for my content. And a rubric is important in any assignment. If there is a rubric, my advice to you would be to look at it to make sure that you have included all of the information that the teacher is expecting. So for content, I can earn up to 4 points. So if it does not meet the standard, that means that the water cycle steps are not included or explained. So maybe we have only included infiltration, runoff, and condensation. Okay, there's a lot more to the water cycle than that, but maybe I have just said those three and just named them. So I've got quite a few steps that aren't explained and even included. Okay, moving up, getting us a better grade are if we include the water cycle steps but not explain them. So again, maybe I've named all of the steps but not given the explanation to each step. The explanation is important for teachers to know that an explanation is your demonstration of understanding the information. If you can explain the information, that proves to me that you understand what the cycle is all about, what each step is. And so exceeding the standard is where I'm going to get the steps of the water cycle. They're all explained, they're all included, whether you are a drop of water or just kind of going through, talking me through the water cycle. Okay, so that's the first area of the rubric. The second area of the rubric is grammar. Now, we are still in school, so grammar should be used at all times, whether it's in science class, math class, or obviously English, grammar should be used. So if I am not capitalizing words, not using periods, then I'm probably not going to get a very good score. It's probably going to be does not meet the standard. Okay, where I'm going to have punctuation and grammar and correct paragraphs are not used. And then if I move up the scale, some of the time they're used. So maybe like every other sentence, I decide to capitalize my sentences or end them with a period. But then I can earn up to 3 points by using correct punctuation, paragraph, and grammar the entire time in my story or explanation. And then my organization. So for this particular activity, my organization section is where I'm going to find what I need to have. Okay, so up for my organization section of my rubric, I can earn up to 3 points. Now, in order to earn 3 points, I'm going to have to exceed the standard. And I'm going to mention all of the parts of the water cycle. So the parts that we spent some time on today. So I'm going to include evaporation, condensation, precipitation, transpiration, sublimation, runoff, and infiltration. I'm going to use all of those terms and explain them to the best of my ability. That's going to exceed the teacher's expectations. If I'm going to meet the standard, I'm going to use some of the steps. So maybe 4 out of the 7 steps I've talked about. So I can talk about, let's say, evaporation, condensation, precipitation, and runoff. Okay, evaporation, condensation, and precipitation are kind of the more obvious steps of the water cycle. And then I've got runoff. So I'm hitting the major targets, but not all of the targets. Okay, and then does not meet the standard. Maybe I just chose to talk about sublimation because I think sublimation is the coolest thing because of it needing cold and super dry climates. So that's the only one that I spoke about. Well, that's not going to give me all the points that I could. It's not going to meet all of my teachers' expectations. Okay, so as a teacher, my advice to you would be to always check the rubric. It always gives you the guidelines for the for completing the activity with 100%. It's also going to give the teacher's expectations for sure to see what the teacher is looking for. Okay. Are there any questions about anything? Any questions about the water cycle or the different spheres of the earth? Maybe the follow the drop activity or even following a rubric. Any questions at all? Any science questions? I'm sorry, I cannot answer why we got a crazy amount of snow and ice yesterday. I can't answer that one. I don't know. I'm sorry. But I did see that Thanksgiving is supposed to be sunny here in Ohio, so that's a good thing. Anything else? Okay. Well, if you think of any other questions after a little bit of time to allow this information to soak in, if you think of any questions, feel free to email me or send me a text using Google Voice. I am here to make sure that you guys are successful in your courses, whether it's biology or systems or whatever you are searching help for. My goal is to make sure that you guys are all successful. So I appreciate you joining me this Friday morning, and I thank you, and I hope that you guys all have a good weekend. Thank you very much.